Welcome. Every year in spring, the Sydney Clockmakers Society holds a meeting at the Barrel Scouts Hall. It is always an enjoyable event, and there is always some special aspect. This year, the Canberra fraternity proved that down under we are not just simply unusual and incredible, but we are inventive also. Take a coffee machine, a steam engine, a jeweller's lathe, and Martin had the tools to start W5.
You can't see it on the movie.
No, it stops you doing it. Do it in steps, a bit at the outside.
You know, you can monitor the speed of this thing by...
You can tell what's happening.
Yeah, you can tell what's happening.
Yeah.
It's a great way to go.
You have to have it out. One of the hardest things to do is catching the centre. To put a point in the end of the centre.
This is Philip Woodward's W5 clock. Philip Woodward was involved in the sister organisation to Bletchley Park during the war for the interpretation and design of over-the-radar, over-the-horizon radar techniques. He was also a horologist and built W5 with minimum facilities. He did it with a watchmaker's lathe, a hacksaw and a vice, and thought about it for 12 months and then put theory into practice by building the first of the W5s, which exists today in Switzerland in the hands of Anthony Randall. The aim was to produce two pendulums running out of phase with each other so that it could be observed by anybody looking at the clock to see that there was a non-phase relationship between the pendulums, and yet that the clock should keep time within 1 second in 100 days, which it does. In this clock, the two pendulums are the ratio 21 is to 30 or 7 is to 10. So there are 3 opportunities every 30 seconds for interference of one pendulum with the other. That's not enough to cause interference, and you start to get into difficulties if you get fancy and say, I'd like to have a metre pendulum here or a 1 second pendulum. You start to get into difficulties, and Philip Woodward suggests very strongly staying with the half second pendulum for that reason. The other issue involved here is that the energy absorbed by precision in-precision timekeepers when the pendulum has to unlock the escapement is a significant force. In this particular clock, all of those things are left to the slave pendulum, all triggered by the fact that the gravity arm drops off the master roller, and at that point triggers a reset, triggers everything that goes on. And the slave is brought up to rate if it's slow. These numbers here indicate that the slave pendulum on this clock is actually about 0.13 seconds of daily rate slow, and the master pendulum is about 12.5 seconds fast. So there's a 12-second lag of the slave on the master. And at the point where the gravity arm drops off the roller, it triggers a whole phasing sequence. First of all, it resets the arm, but it also introduces the synchronizing spring if that turns out to be a phase issue, because it's a hit and miss arrangement. What it does is accelerate the slave pendulum by something approximating 1/100 of a second a day. And that's this hair clip, this paperclip shaped spring. And if you watch it, it doesn't engage every time, because the phase is okay until the slave pendulum starts to drop behind, and then you'll see the spring expand as it gets caught on the passing of the slave over the top of it. The beauty of the clock is that in that question of impulsing, the the gravity arm is lowered onto the roller of the master, but in the act of lowering onto the master, it's giving the slave its energy and its impulse. The difficulty with the original design of the clock is that the count wheel has a 3mm pitch, 3mm pitch between teeth, and the difficulty is that with the amplitude that you can get out of a slave pendulum, it's right at the edge of possibility as to whether you can maintain an amplitude to be able to drive a 3mm pitch wheel. What we've done is change over to a 2mm pitch wheel. You can see the experimental holes here, and in that respect this clock is starting to resemble Harrison's clock. It's got holes bored all over the place. Some of them are a plain mistake and others were experimental, and I'll bore all them out and plug them up and you won't even know they were there by the time we finish. But the fact is that the 2mm pitch is something that's easily maintained by the slave. And all of the energy problems associated with this clock are out the window. They're gone. They don't matter anymore. The original, excuse me, the original clock, W5, is held by Anthony Randall, now living in Switzerland. And to keep that running, they have to graphite the count wheel every 4 to 6 months, and that's run a soft pencil around the edges of it to keep it happening. As far as I'm aware, that's also the case with the others that have been made along the original pattern. The other thing that we've done is we've lowered the towing point from up at the point here to about 20% down the arm, giving further travel available to give more energy to the slave if we need it. It turns out we don't. The weight as it stands, this is only about half full of lead. On the other hand, it's not over the other pulleys, giving it a month driving. This, as it stands, will run a fortnight with this weight and these ratios. As soon as we put in the extra lead and put in the extra pulley, which is a single fall but double pull, it will give us month running. The clocks made by David Walter are running on 3 times the weight that we now have this running on, and this is already less than the original W5 by a considerable margin because of the energy saving device that we've introduced in here as well as doing that, it takes away the fly because that's no longer necessary either. But the beauty of it is that I think that by the time we get through installing bull races throughout the train, which is next, dueling when necessary, which is everywhere where we're not putting in bull races, I think I have an aim that to get this clock running on something like the weight normally required to run a Vienna regulator, about 1¼ kilos per week of running. So I think 5 kilos, I'm aiming for 5 kilos for a month of running. The original W5, now in Switzerland with Anthony Randall, runs on 4.8 kilos per 2 weeks. So we're aiming for about half what the original does, and we're well on the way to doing that. There are some efficiencies to be gained in this area here. I, just by looking at it by eye, can already determine that we're losing a lot of energy in that having released the sequence to drop the gravity arm and give the slave its impulse, we're lifting far too much because the more you lift, the more you have to replace that energy in the fall, and it's only the net fall that's then available to the slave by way of energy. If we can put the unlatching further towards the top of that graph, then the more energy is available to the slave, and when more we can knock weight out of here. The gravity arm at the point is delivering 2 grams. The specification specifies or suggests 2–2¼ grams. I think David Walter's clocks is running on about 3. We can make all sorts of things happen by adding, there's a small threaded rod on the other side of the gravity arm, which you wouldn't see unless you knew about it. You do now. You can screw weights onto that or take them off. For every 0.1 of a gram that you put on there, you add a kilo here. So every 0.1 of a gram I can get off the gravity arm is weight that comes out of this main driving weight. I'm not going to take up further time because we've got other events. Are there any questions that arise, having had a look and having heard Eric?
Calling this the JW5?
It's the JW5. Because it's JAX. It's JAX. It's no longer a prototype. It's going through this process, but it's JAX. That's it. Decision.